Hello, welcome to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things relating to your well-being, including interviews with experts in the fields of nutrition, physical health, mental health, and my 5-minute food facts series. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host, a nutritionist with a passion for well-being. Before I introduce today's guests, I will take a moment to let you know that you can subscribe to my podcast on YouTube, hit the red subscribe button, or on your favourite podcast app, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. I will also mention that although I will often be speaking with experts, any information or advice provided in Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast is not intended to be used to treat, cure, or prevent injuries, disease, or medical conditions, and it is not a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. Today I am here with Maria Harpas and Tim Jaeger of Natural Health Medicine. Maria is the director of the Natural Health Medicine practice, where she is a naturopath and clinical nutritionist. Maria's areas of passion in her work include digestive health and immune health. Plus, she enjoys working with patients with cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Tim is a nutritional medicine specialist and a Bredesen Protocol certified practitioner, and I'll get Tim to explain to you what that means. Tim's specialty is treating cognitive decline and many other issues, including gastrointestinal function, autoimmunity, and fatigue. Obviously, there is so much ground we could potentially cover, from the treatment of allergies to disease management, and indeed we will touch on some of those issues, but for today's episode we've decided to focus on the impact of diet on health and the clinical roles of Tim and Maria as natural health practitioners in assessing what sort of diet or way of eating is going to help a particular client. Before we dive into that, I would like Tim and Maria to let our listeners know a bit about their paths to becoming natural health practitioners. So Maria, if I could please start with you. I believe you used to work in the travel industry and now you're a clinical nutritionist and a naturopath. What inspired this change in career?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So I started in travel and loved what I was doing there, and then I moved from Travelland to Ansett, and of course I had just fallen pregnant and Ansett went under.
Yes,
and
I know.
And so that inspired me to start studying. Mm-hmm. But I had already started having a lot of interest in natural health because I was suffering a lot of allergies. So hay fever I would have all year round, not just in the hay fever season. And I was really coming up against a lot of problems with normal conventional medicine in terms of it was just continual antihistamines. And when I wasn't taking them, I felt like I was getting worse. And so that really got me started on looking into natural therapies, and that's where it went. And initially really as a hobby and just to help myself.
Yes.
And now, 10, 11 years of clinical practice.
Yeah,
and
it's your life.
That's right. It's
and
my
you have
career
helped yourself, I assume, yes?
Yes, my gut is in way better nick now.
Oh, that's great.
So that's good. It's a journey. We're always improving and changing things. And, the more you know, with Tim, we're always looking at our pathology and what's going on and how we can change and improve. Yeah. So it's really good.
There is so much to know. I think it's, as you say,
Absolutely.
It's a continuing journey. I think in this area particularly, more information comes to light all the time.
That's right, yeah.
So, and Tim, what about you? I know that your journey has encompassed microbiology, immunology, public relations, and lacrosse. So quite a spectrum there. So what led you to becoming a nutritional medicine specialist?
I sort of don't know where to start, but thanks for having us. I just like to say I'm
pleasure.
really excited to be here, and this is my first podcast. I know Maria's done some interviews in that. Is this your first ever podcast?
Yeah.
Hopefully it won't be your last.
We heard, Maria talking about her journey, and something that I was thinking about even on the way down here was when I was worked in London and lived in London for 3.5 years at one stage, and there was a client of mine, a massage client. I did work there, remedial massage work, and she was the accountant for Sylvester Stallone for some of his movie productions, and she said to me something like, everything that you're doing now, all your experiences that you're having and you will have, they're going to mean something to you. They're going to be of real benefit further along in your life. And it really resonates with me now that she was sort of true. And she said, you won't realize it. And working with people, knowing the things that I've seen, and I have this other sort of perspective, and I know Maria talks about it all the time as well. Knowing how to relate to people, and I think that's so much a big part of what we do, building this relationship.
Yeah.
Going back to how did I get to nutritional medicine, I was always interested in sports and science, and I went to university after school and studied. My majors were pharmacology, that was one subject, and the other one was immunology, microbiology, virology. And I went into working at was called the Adelaide Children's Hospital back then, and in the immunology department I did research on, of all things, malaria. And I even have some papers with my name on it somewhere, I think. And towards the end of my time at the hospital working in the immunology department, I actually did a remedial massage course, and I went overseas to London and lived there, like I was saying, for 3.5 years, and worked in top hotels like the Dorchester and Claridge's, and worked at the Chelsea Harbour Club at one time, and I really had a good time and had a lot of experiences there. And I came back and I worked in the same sort of area, and a friend of mine also had said to me, you should become a firefighter. And he said, it's a really good lifestyle and you get a lot of time to do everything else. And I wanted something else in my life as well. So I was actually thinking of getting into more business stuff. And that's how I did my graduate diploma in communications and public relations. And just as I was finishing that, I actually got into the fire service. And I've been like a firefighter at the South Australian Metropolitan Fire Service for 17 years. 17 years, I'm going, wow.
That's actually how we met, but I'll fill you in on that story a bit later.
Yeah. So, through that time, getting back to nutritional medicine. So what led me back to what is really a passion, the science and the clinical stuff was... my father-in-law getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. And the thing was, I remember the date, 20th of August 2010. And I'd had a book that I bought 2 years before about Alzheimer's, and I never read it yet. And from that point, I started reading.
Is it this?
No, not. It might have been this, The Alzheimer's Solution. Amanda's holding a book in front of.
Pulled a few books down from my shelf.
And I started reading, and I just never stopped reading and listening to science and health, but it was always a clinical focus though, therapeutic focus. I've decided that's what I want to do. So I did an advanced diploma in nutritional medicine. I met, I have a great mentor now in Maria and colleague, that's sort of how I came across being a practitioner. Yeah,
so I would say it's a fairly long and winding road, but you have found your true passion in life, which is clear.
Yeah.
So if we move on to counselling patients and in particular looking at their diet. So Maria, when a client comes to see you, it can usually be assumed that they're there because there's something that's not quite right. It might be a diagnosed disease like diabetes, or they're just not feeling, as if things are going right for them. So
that's right.
Where do you begin? Like, what do you do? Can you outline that process for us?
Yeah, sure. So both of those reasons are why people come. Either they've been diagnosed with something, or they're not feeling 100% and they don't really know why, and they don't have a diagnosis.
Yes.
And so the first thing that we do is we want to go through and really get an understanding of what's happened to a person through their life, with their health history, but not just whether they've been unwell. We also want to know their habits, their what they sleep like, what did they sleep like when they were younger, what illnesses they had when they were younger, what sort of illnesses are in the family history. So we sort of start to get an idea about risks.
Yes.
So that then starts to direct what testing that we might do.
Is it a bit like putting a jigsaw together?
Yes.
There's lots of different pieces, aren't there?
Tim always says that, actually, that it's like, putting the pieces of a jigsaw down and trying to work it out. So, so we're trying to, we sort of work out what type of predisposition someone has. So, for instance, if we're looking at someone like me, that history of allergy, for instance, and we want to go off and actually we can do really simple tests that doctors can do. And we like to start with the simple tests where we, where necessary before we get to more expensive testing, because a lot of times it doesn't always have to go to that. And it gives us a bit of an idea, are we actually dealing with full-blown allergy, or actually is the allergy marker that we would measure in the blood normal, and is it possible that we're dealing with someone that can't clear histamine, for instance? So we start to be able to narrow down where the issues are. Then what we need to do is start to decide what things need to be changed. And like you said before, we have focused on 6 major areas.
Yes.
And obviously diet is one of the biggest ones and the most controversial in terms of what should we eat and how we should be eating. And I know we're going to sort of cover that later. So we look at diet, we look at sleep, we look at stress management, we look at, how well people, because stress is perceived, and so we really look at what tools people have to manage stress, which is important. We look at social connection and human connection. I think that gets forgotten in the whole health.
Yeah, it does.
When we're looking at health issues. And then we look at environmental influences. Now we've got Wi-Fi, we've got chemicals and additives in foods and things that really our ancestors didn't have and weren't dealing with. And so we then start to decide what are the few things we can start with to change that are going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, because if you say to someone, you've got to change these 20 things, it's too hard.
Oh, we don't. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
And not many of us would do that and maintain or sustain doing it.
Yeah.
There'll be, it's much better as well to start making a few changes and see what that gives us.
Yes. And if it has a positive result, then
that's right.
They're more likely to continue.
Yeah, that's right. And then we add on. So, So we might start to look at things like diet, and if someone really finds it hard to change their diet, we might look at how they're putting their diet together, for instance. We might say, well, let's look at 3 good meals a day, stop eating after dinner, or so we really sort of look at the habits around that, and that can make a big difference. So not everybody, I think we have to match what the changes, even though they have to be slow, we've also got to match the changes to the severity of the condition that we're dealing with.
Sometimes I think people, unless it's pointed out to them, they may not realise that the habit that they're in is unhelpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, us humans, I think we're pretty good at being... we can do anything if we put our mind to it in terms of changing habits, but it's not always easy to do. And I feel one of our jobs is to really help people think about other ways of doing things that sometimes they wouldn't have even thought of.
Yeah.
And that can be really powerful.
And I think the fact that they've come to see you is really sending a message that they're willing to change.
Oh, absolutely. I think, most people are willing to change. I think sometimes when people don't come, it's interesting when people comment on, oh, I've delayed coming, because they're scared that they won't be able to do it.
Yeah, that fear of
and
failure.
that's so interesting. And I
Yeah.
think because they think that they're going to be told to do all these things, and then if they can't, and so I'm not a purist, firstly, and so I really like, what's the minimum that we have to do to get the maximum outcome,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good place to start and understand, and then we can build on that
Absolutely.
from there if we want to. But it's always good to know, actually, it's only eggs, for instance, that really bothers me, rather than taking everything always out of the diet, because you don't know. So we try to get people to understand what are the things that are being a problem. And even though initially we do elimination diets and things like that, they're short-lived. They should never be long-term unnecessarily.
Yeah.
You know, there are instances, and it's very individualized how we put things together, because it's also based on what someone can manage.
Exactly. And
so
we're all different.
We're all different. We've all had different rearing, and there's different things even between Tim and I. We talk about what I would tolerate doing is different to what Tim would tolerate doing. What we're dealing with in terms of our health, it's sort of, sometimes you sort of go, no, I'm not willing to sacrifice that. And I think everyone's got the right to choose that. Our job is to sort of say, well, if you do this, you could get this outcome.
Yeah.
Because we see it all the time. We know what the likely outcomes are.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Oh, that sounds like a really thorough and consultative approach. So,
Yeah.
And Tim, what about you? Like, how do you approach a client when they come to see you? Like, what's your process?
Well, I mean, because I'm specialising with Alzheimer's dementia, so it's a little bit different. But I agree with everything Maria's talking about, and we're always having this sort of discussion and conversation. And a big part of it is collecting a lot of data with Alzheimer's. The labs, the history, the symptoms, and that jigsaw puzzle that you're talking about.
So just to interrupt a little bit, when you see a patient with Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, I assume they come with a friend or a partner often, do they? Or
Yeah, I don't think I've seen anybody that hasn't come with...
Yes, because I think, could they manage?
No, I'll take that back. So there's 2 people that I've seen, but they're coming just for prevention.
Right.
2 younger people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Has it run in their families or...?
The younger one, yes, it seems to be the runs in the family. And the other one read Dale Bredesen's The End of Alzheimer's, and she was so excited that I want to do a cognoscopy, I want to look at all my risk factors and make sure that this is something that I'm not heading towards.
And actually, sorry, I keep interrupting you, Tim,
No.
but I did mention in the introduction that you prescribe, if that's the right word, the Bredesen Protocol. So perhaps you can just tell us what that is and then continue on.
Dr. Dale Bredesen, neurodegenerative researcher from America, just sort of finished the book, The End of Alzheimer's, and his passion was researching. He wanted to know why Alzheimer's is occurring from a biochemical sort of perspective, and his, because the diagnosis of Alzheimer's is just based on pathology, and that was done in the 1950s,
Right.
and he was in the lab working out the biochemistry to what actually happens, with the beta amyloid accumulation, what causes that, what other factors are contributing to this pathology that we find with Alzheimer's. And his wife, who's a functional medicine doctor in America, he always said to him, Dale, it's not going to be one magic bullet, which is what the scientists are trying to chase. It's going to be lifestyle, diet, inflammation.
Of course.
Yeah. And guess what? 25 years later, it sort of dawned on him, my wife was actually right, because everything they
go
found...
women.
Because everything that he found directed him back to these sort of changes that we can make with lifestyle and diet. And we need to, at times, prescribe hormones for trophic support, signaling support for the growth of neurons. So he's based his treatment of Alzheimer's on there's 4 sort of main sort of categories. You know, type 1 is a inflammatory type condition. Type 1.5 is actually in between the 1 and the type 2. With type 2 is a loss of growth sort of support. So that's hormones, even vitamin D, insulin resistance. And 1.5 is when you actually have like pre-diabetes or even diabetes. So you're not getting that insulin support that you need. And it's 1.5 because it also has inflammation associated with that.
So it very
excess.
much links into lifestyle, obviously.
Absolutely. And then the third one, which, you know, we talk about as being the hardest to treat, is this type 3, a toxic sort of presentation, whether that's heavy metals, you know, mercury is the biggest sort of contributor, or even biotoxins and organic toxins that we have to sort of look for and search for.
Right. Oh, there's so many things, isn't there? But anyway, back to how do you, patient comes to see you and you collect the data, and then what's next?
So yeah, the data is telling us something. It's telling us the directions, you know, are they, and it's never a pure type 1, 1.5, 2 or 3. It's never pure. There's always contributions from multiple areas.
Right.
So, you know, we go back to what Maria was talking about. We need a dietary change more often than not, and the default for Alzheimer's is actually a ketogenic diet, which we'll probably talk about later on. But it's, you know, basic lifestyle and diet, and I might, you know, stress management, exercise as part of the program, meditation or walks in nature. They're actually part of the real deal with the real treatment for what we want to do. And you know, we're addressing the inflammation that we find. You know, we might find sleep apnea, and I have like numerous times already, gut infections. We might find nutrient deficiencies that we have to correct. So that's all the basic sort of things that we would start with. And then it's about, Maria sort of touched on it, it's we're looking under the hood and seeing what's underlying, and then we're just we're correcting this dysfunction. And it's really
step by step.
Step by step. And the diet and lifestyle isn't window dressing. It's the real. It's real. Yeah, it's the real therapeutic thing, and it works for everybody at some level.
Yeah, I was just going to say to that, I think it's until I started practicing, I didn't realise how powerful diet and sleep and all the things, all this lifestyle medicine, all these lifestyle medicine techniques, how important they are. You know, nothing can really trump them. You know, you have to have those in place.
You do, and I think the trouble with going to see a conventional doctor is, first of all, they don't have a lot of time to consult, and secondly, they don't often look at the big picture. I mean, some doctors do. My GP's brilliant and she does, but not all of them do.
No, and I think it's not their area of training.
Exactly.
And I think that's the big thing. Their area is to diagnose. They're fantastic. You know, I always say, like, if I have an accident, take me to the nearest doctor. Or if I'm in a life-threatening type of situation, you know, with a virus or bacterial or something, that it's like, something's got to happen now. It doesn't matter if it's due to things that I've done, but, you know, it's got to be fixed now. And, you know, and that's great. And there is a real place for making sure, because we work with a lot of GPs, to make sure that we've got them picking up things that might be quite serious, that may need initial treatment for now medically until we can come in and do other things. But in saying that, there's also just, it's astounding about how many things can be resolved with lifestyle medicine.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I really like about your practice, is that dialogue you have with GPs, because sometimes in this world there can be a bit of a divide. Like some GPs are very anti-natural health, for example. So it's good to find GPs that will have that open dialogue.
And I think because we're quite, you know, the approach is quite sensible. And you can't argue with
And
a sensible
scientific.
and scientific. You can't argue with that. So, and we don't make any excuses for that. You know, when I'm talking to a doctor, and it's like, well, this person's actually only sleeping 3 hours, and they've got anxiety and they've got depression, and they're actually eating high sugar foods, which we know affects mood, and we know sleep deprivation affects mood, and so. Before we start going to heavy medication, unless of course, you know,
that's required
they're
for something.
suicidal or
Yeah.
there's, you know, there's things that we should be coming in and sorting those things out immediately. They are number one priority things to be sorted. And so I think that gets this idea when I hear people saying, I don't believe in natural therapies, I kind of go, well, you don't believe in eating then. You don't believe in
life.
sleeping. You don't believe that you need to have other humans around you.
Yeah.
You don't believe, I mean, it's a ridiculous comment.
Yes.
And it just shows the lack of understanding, really.
Yeah, that's what it shows.
It's not a competitive thing.
No.
You know, that's the thing.
It just shows that perhaps that person making the comment doesn't, as you say, doesn't really understand what natural therapies are.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I get, you know, there's always this conversation as well around supplements. You know, we want to treat things with the lifestyle things first.
Yes.
And then we use supplements therapeutically where we need to. But
Yes.
then we always want to move people to more whole food supplements and then diet.
Yeah,
wherever we
diet.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that might be a good point to start talking a bit about diet. So one of the things that I know is really tricky is changing dietary habits.
Yes.
You know, I mean, even with all the knowledge that we have, I still eat chocolate, I drink coffee, I drink alcohol, you know,
Yeah.
because I enjoy those things. If you have clients who really need to make a change to their diet for their health, what kind of tools do you have? How can you support them through that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing is for us to sort of understand we're pleasure-seeking organisms, right? So, you know, we move.
Default, we're hardwired.
Yeah, we're hardwired that way. So we move to pleasure, we move away from pain. And so, and then we've got habits as well that we've learnt growing up and developed ourselves as well. And so I always like initially some education because that can be powerful.
Yeah.
So, for instance, you know, eating chocolate, for instance, if the dose comes to this level, this is what it does to your insulin levels, this is what it does to your blood sugar levels, and having a look at that. And so, you know, sometimes the first step is just let's lower the dose.
Yeah.
Right? Or let's look at other things that will be satisfying. So as that becomes less attractive. When I changed my diet, I was a sugar addict in my 20s. So I would literally be putting 3 tablespoons of sugar into my cereal. And even though we didn't know a lot about sugar back then, I knew that it wasn't right.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want people telling me that I shouldn't do it. Right? Because I felt that it was unquenchable. I needed it.
Yeah.
Because the cravings.
And it was a habit for you.
And it was a habit. And so once I started understanding and reading, actually, the more fats you put in your diet, the more satisfied you get, the less cravings, and the more consistently that you're ensuring that you've got decent amounts of proteins and fats throughout the day, and real food. I sort of heard someone talking about how some of our foods now, healthy foods, have become dessert foods, really.
Yeah.
And so we have to watch that as well with all the, you know, high doses of almond milk and coconut milk we're having. And I'm not sure that we were really designed to have them in the quantities that we are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
And so it's starting to, we give ideas on how to start to change things like that. So, okay, let's start increasing the amount of fats you have, or let's start increasing the protein you'll have. Let's make the food more, let's have fun with the food, make the food more interesting. Because I think if food is too boring, you're going to keep going back to those other foods that are not so attractive. You know, I really don't, all the food that I've left behind, I hardly ever look at now, you know, because I've got this big array of beautiful different foods that I can put together really quickly as well. So it's giving tips like that to help them. And we've got lots of them that we give, you know, lots of little things like that we start to help people with, and finding the thing that person will be most drawn to.
Yes.
You know, so antipasto, you know, get people to have lots of different antipasto sort of things, like artichokes and asparagus on hand, olives and dips, because then, you know, and people really light up when they hear that, and eating that instead of sugars. You know, they're quite happy to move to those things, but you've got to have them in the home.
Of course, that's part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Tim, do you have any comments on that, supporting
you had
clients?
Probably tools, you know, quick start guides and meal plans and recipes and shopping lists. And I think, though, it's about building this therapeutic relationship with the person, really connecting.
It's got to be, hasn't it?
Keeping it real, keeping it practical, being human, you know, all these things that Maria's already sort of talked about. And like other sort of tools is, Maria talks about it all the time, is we need to give options and solutions. You know, that's our job. And Maria's really like the queen of this. Like I call it one of her superpowers. Like literally, like a client never walks away without an option and a solution, you know, and that's our job. There's a clinician that I heard once say, you know, we're not paid for what we say, we're paid for what we know, you know. Wow, our job is to distill the essence of what is needed and then coach someone through, you know, a health coach them through this problem with, you know, these tools that we've sort of talked about. You know, Maria's talked about we need the broadest, most flexible diet possible for someone. But with Alzheimer's, we don't have that flexibility anymore.
That's very interesting.
Right,
That's taken away from us, that freedom of being, we don't have that negotiation anymore. So, you know, the default that I've talked about is a low carb, you know, ketogenic approach. And that's not easy because it's so restrictive.
And also it's quite different from the way a lot of people have eaten in the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, simplifying this journey for the people, that's really important.
So, Tim, if we touch on the ketogenic diet in relation to Alzheimer's, how do you get someone started with that? And how hard is it to change? I mean, I guess that depends on the person, but it's a pretty big motivating factor.
Maria was just whispering little steps, you know, small steps, incremental steps. And for when someone comes in, it will be, okay, what the foundation, what can we, you know, take away that we need to take away? Let's have a whole food diet. Let's make it nutrient dense to start with. Let's take out the inflammatory foods. You know, the glutens, you know, is necessary for Alzheimer's, the dairy even. What do we put in the diet? What should we concentrate on? You know, the good quality meats, the good fats, you know, loads of vegetables. You know, and even if we just do that, we're actually more than halfway there. You know, and that's a lot of changes still. But it's little steps.
What I was going to say to that as well is that we, you know, an athlete doesn't become an athlete overnight. And so making changes to our lives and starting to look at them differently. So it's not just, I have to do this to feel better, but more moving in and enjoying it and starting to really embrace doing things differently, because the way we eat now is just so different to how we were designed to be eating. And knowing that it is sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but when you look back at where you've come from as you keep journeying through, it's exciting. But to know it's not, you're not going to become the best eater overnight. There's no way, because you don't have, I've got, you know, clients that come in with the best, they're so excited, and sometimes they do want to do a hardcore cleanse or a, you know, something quite strict, and we use that energy that they've got and that excitement they've got to do that. But when they come out of that, it's that thing of they don't have anything to fall back on yet, because they haven't learnt yet.
They haven't changed their habits.
Yeah, to change the habits. So it's sort of they're left, until we help teach them and train them to do and have things there at their disposal. Yeah.
And even going back to, giving these options and solutions, I know Maria also, and I have to even more so, you have to keep your eye on the goal.
Yeah.
And the biochemistry still, and watch what's happening, and yes, a step back, but we have to keep moving in this forward direction all the time. Another tool that I've done, an exception, was I actually had a home appointment where we cooked lunch together. So we talked about what was happening, we talked about things that we needed to do, but we actually cooked food that was going to be good to eat.
Brilliant way to do a consultation.
So it's powerful, very powerful, and it goes into that social interaction and how often do we gather around food and prepare food together. So we talked about this in a clinic setting, how we could maybe even have cooking demonstrations and have people gather
and at the same time educate them about the food.
Yeah. See it, taste it, do it, cook it. Yeah, it's really good.
It's good for you. So while we're talking about diet, and Maria's already touched on this, so different people respond to different diets and may need to eliminate certain foods or add some in. So how do you gauge what's the best or most appropriate diet for a particular client?
Yeah, okay. So there's the three main things that really direct what diet, because diet is so controversial.
It is.
From keto to vegan to carnivore now to paleo.
Yeah.
I mean, it's out there. I think the first main thing is whole food eating.
Yeah, you can't argue with
You
that,
can't argue
whichever
with that.
camp you're in.
And so, and that can be, I'm not sure that people always understand what that really is, but foods basically in the way that nature has got them. And I guess ultimately that's raw food, isn't it? But so then it becomes how processed a food is, what oils it's cooked in. There's big problems with the types of oils being used now. And so, having foods as whole as possible, because you can have a very junk food vegan diet, like
easily.
You can have a junk food paleo diet or a carnivore diet if it's not. So I think the type of diet is one thing, but actually making sure that it's whole foods and
so
cooked
that's
in
kind
the
of
right.
the baseline.
That's the baseline. No additives and not So there are and not a high sugar diet. So it's easily with all of them. I mean, paleo's still got dried fruit and fruit in it. Someone could just live on that all day.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and say they're paleo.
So, and a vegan diet can be just white refined products.
And chips.
Exactly. So, cooked in, I found out some really fancy oils now, like cottonseed oil, and this is not healthy eating, right? So that's the first thing that we fix up, right? And that's really important. And sometimes doing that first with what someone's already used to doing, can be enough for some people, but not in Tim's area. Like Tim said, that's a different ball game. So we then decide by their symptoms. So if someone is more allergy prone or autoimmune or cardiovascular, so there's a lot of cardio inflammatory markers and things like that, that's going to decide on the diet, what type of diet. We then look at the pathology, so we're looking under the bonnet. So if they're iron deficient, if they're B12 deficient, if they're, if autoimmune markers are elevated, that's going to direct it. And also then back to what we've all been talking about, what can they manage?
Yes.
Right. And so even with what, for Alzheimer's, and we still have to give them things at the rate they can manage. We just try to make it a bit quicker, don't we, Tim?
Well, there's a necessity
because there's
too.
a necessity to do that. And so that's, and basically with everyone, that's what we're looking at is what can you manage? This is the sort of diet we're going to go to.
Yeah.
We'll want to move to,
And I guess personal preferences as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And knowledge in terms of cooking skills and all those things come into it.
You know, there were stages with my health where it was, you're not having a good time. Yeah. With what you feel you have to do. And so you want to have fun with it. You want to sort of go, well, okay, so if this is really, we try and prioritise. This for you is really not good. We have to take it off the agenda of what you do. So, we want to sort of try and make it fit.
And I guess if you say this is not good for you, the other thing you can do is replace it with something that is good. So
we always do that.
Yeah, I thought you would.
I mean, I know an example not that long ago, or Maria sort of mentioned again, someone with a lot of anxiety and just taking out caffeine and coffee was all that was needed. Like literally. But literally.
Yeah. And interesting with that is we don't realise how much caffeine is in all our foods because it's not just coffee. Or black tea, it's green tea, it's chai tea, it's also in cacao, the beautiful, healthy. So sometimes I've got mothers that come in that are giving their kids these beautiful cacao smoothies or things after dinner, and then they're wondering why the child can't sleep. And so these are the things that that's why we need to look at it all and go, okay, this is a possibility of what could be happening.
Yes, and it comes back to knowledge, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't give that to your child if you knew that it had caffeine in it.
Of course not,
Yeah, sorry, Tim.
What was I going to say? There's a term that I really like, JERF, just eat real food.
Yeah.
If you can pick
Michael Pollan.
If you can pick it, cut it up, kill it, dress it, cook it, that's sort of a really easy way of thinking about what real food is. And I know we've talked about, should everybody be on a ketogenic diet? And I think the answer to that is, probably not. But I'll also say that I reckon that the majority of people, and majority I mean greater than 50% of people, could benefit from a lower carbohydrate diet, not ketogenic. And why do I say that? I say that because of the rates of obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We see that increasing all around us.
Yes,
and I think a lower carb diet would actually be beneficial for all of those sort of conditions.
Yeah. I think carbs have been much maligned actually as well. And I think it's important to understand the different types of carbohydrate because obviously there's carbohydrate in vegetables, but they're good for you. But having a packaged cake, which is full of carbs, is not.
And it's about your risks and where your health is at the time and what you've got to really look at and consider for sure.
I mean, with Alzheimer's as well, it's we have that default ketogenic diet that we have to sort of a low carb diet that we have to move towards, and doing that just like we were talking about through that initial introduction of a whole food, nutrient dense anti-inflammatory diet is really important. And I think about choosing a diet, there's a little bit of genetics in play, but it's more the majority, 80-90% is about the environment that we find that person that you've gone through life with. That sleep, are you eating a lot of junk food? Do you have a toxic sort of burden? Are you under huge stress? Or are you a professional athlete doing high intensity exercise that would actually need to fuel some of that with some good whole food carbohydrates? So they're all the environmental or the external sort of factors.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a jigsaw puzzle. But just while we're on the keto diet, Tim, could you tell me what do you see in the treatment? Do you see reversal? Do you see plateauing in terms of ongoing decline, or how does it manifest?
We talk about, ketogenic diet is therapeutic for, insulin resistance. So is fasting, whether that's intermittent fasting or longer fasting. The ketogenic diet is another form of energy for the brain and the neurons, but it also helps synapse connections. It's lower in oxidative stress. It lowers inflammation. So it has all these other genetic changes and effects, not just in the amount of carbohydrates in the body and the lowering of insulin. So that's what Bredesen's finding. It's very beneficial for the disease, and getting certain levels of ketones in the body is sort of what we're aiming for.
How does that help the patients? Have you seen sort of a reversal, or
can
it be? I don't know if it can be.
It's a complete package though.
Right.
And depending on how far along in the disease, you'll see changes. Actually, I spoke to a client just this morning, and he isn't even in a ketogenic diet, but we found severe sleep apnea. We found a stomach infection. We found insulin resistance. So he's just gone on a paleo sort of template, just whole foods. And he actually said he does a lot of stock exchange stuff still,
right.
And there's all these passwords that he has to remember, and he wasn't able to remember them. He had them all written down. He actually said to me this morning, he said, I've actually memorized all these passwords again. And I'm like, that's really exciting.
Yeah. And I was also going to say, Amanda, we can give different advice to two different people. So, for one person, fasting is appropriate. And then for another person, it's like, absolutely no way are you to fast.
Yeah.
And so, because there's so much information out there, and people do come to us with a lot of information, and one of our jobs is to decide whether that is a good fit for them. Even if, and it can also change in your life cycle as well. So sometimes we're doing something and then it's like, no, that's not appropriate now. I've got to change direction. And I think that's one of the skills that is impossible to get from the internet, because you can't put it into context for you.
That's right.
Yeah.
And as you say, life cycle, so if someone's trying to get pregnant, that's very different from someone trying to lose weight or with Alzheimer's disease. Or
that's right. Or someone with really chronic fatigue, is what we're going to get them to do is going to be different.
Yeah, I mean, even Maria said to me the other day, with this ketogenic diet, and if we don't find someone moving into ketosis easily within a shorter space of time, and it's even more important with Alzheimer's, if we deprive the body of a glucose source for neurons, and then we deprive it, we're not making ketone bodies, which is the other energy source, then we're actually starving the brain from two different directions. So we have to really think about what we're about to do.
Good point.
Can we adjust and make sure that they're into ketosis, or do we then go, okay, let's take a step back for a little while and just introduce some whole food carbohydrates again? And that's appropriate because we're assessing what's happening.
And that's why I think it's so important to be guided by a health professional in that pathway.
And a lot of people that go on keto, like when people come to me and they go, I'm doing keto, and I check their ketones on the machine, they're not in ketosis at all.
Right.
And so because they don't actually really understand what that means. And so it's exactly what Tim said. We have to rethink whether that's appropriate. Yeah.
I mean, a little hint that you might be in ketosis, apart from actually measuring your blood ketones, would be a real cognitive spike in your attention and your ability to focus for 24/7.
Well, I think we probably need to start wrapping this up, but just a couple more questions. Do either of you have any inspiring stories that you can share with us?
Oh, sure. I've got lots.
I'm sure you do.
In what we've done to help people.
Yes.
Oh, sure. So I've had a few clients whose gallbladders were going to be removed, and we've saved that.
Wow.
One was actually a celiac, undiagnosed.
Oh, you're joking.
And so did not need a gallbladder removal. I think 90% of the time, I just get so excited when people feel better, their energy's better, it transfers to their whole life.
I'm sure.
And how they are with their families, how they can manage things. So, that is just common for us all the time.
That's great to see.
Yeah. And so that is exciting. That's the generally big things that we always hear and see, and understanding food and developing a different relationship with food. And because sometimes when women are always dieting, they have such a horrible relationship with food. They don't even know how to have fun.
It's like a war.
And eat. Yeah, it's guilt every time they put something in their mouth, and that's just no way to live.
No, it's certainly not.
No, and so it's beautiful when we start to change that.
I suppose for me, it's sort of early days with treating Alzheimer's. I mean, I just told you about the guy that I'm seeing with the remembering his passwords now. But things like the severe sleep apnea, that's common. I've picked that up so many times now.
Very
There's like 70-80% of people with sleep apnea are undiagnosed. I had another lady that we had a dental sort of checkup, and she had periodontal disease, so a lot of inflammation. But if that was left a little bit longer, she would have lost all her teeth.
Oh dear.
So I forget about the cognition, these quality of life sort of things that we're picking up. Another person had blood in the stool, was a gut infection. It was actually H. pylori. So we treat that, and all of a sudden, it was probably an ulcer, and that will change. So all these little tiny wins, they're really exciting, and
I guess that's what keeps you doing it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think as well, like especially when we start to see teenagers and girls being put on the pill, and no one's actually telling them about the effect on their copper levels and their cortisol levels, and so they get anxiety and then they don't know why.
Yeah.
And so really, helping how they're going to manage that.
Yes.
Because there are, if they want to stay on the pill, there's herbs we can give to help the cortisol levels. So just when people are not feeling good and they're going in the wrong direction, things are moving all in the wrong direction. And I think mental health, mood is a big one.
Yes.
That we improve a lot.
I think we're going to have to do another podcast because there's so much more to say. But I'll just ask my final question now. If you could recommend 2 things that people could do to improve their well-being, what would they be? The top 2.
The top 2.
It's hard.
Okay, so I think my top 2 would be, the first would be whole food eating and sleeping. Mm-hmm. So having those 2 things. And actually my second is questioning our thinking all the time, because it drives our behaviour.
Yeah, brilliant. So, And Tim?
I'm going to cheat because I'm going to say it's a given that you move a little bit more and you're eating a whole food diet, because this is what we're always told, and it's it's true. It's good.
Those boxes are ticked.
They're
so
ticked.
What next?
So I'm going to actually say come in and get a really thorough health checkup. Get some lab markers done, get a history taken, have a look at your symptoms, have a look at under that bonnet that we're sort of talking about.
Look after yourself.
And really get someone to interpret all of this information really carefully. And, with the Bredesen stuff, it's a cognoscopy, it's much more extensive, but we're still looking under and seeing what your risk factors are. And the other one I'm going to say is valuing your family and your relationships and taking the time to spend with them, are really enjoying that, being in the present moment. Like I've got a little boy, and I like, with all the clinical stuff and other work that I do, you sometimes forget to be in the moment with him, and that's really special, and that comes back to that social connection. I think that's such a huge driver in well-being as well. Yeah,
I agree. And they grow up so quickly. Thank you both so much for coming on the podcast, and I think we're going to have to schedule another one.
Thanks so much, Amanda, for having us.
That was Maria Harpas and Tim Jaeger of Natural Health Medicine. The podcast was longer than usual because we had so much to say. You can connect with them via their website, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. You will also find the 2 books about Alzheimer's that we mention on the books page of my website. And just very quickly, the story about how I met Tim. When I was away overseas recently and my 18-year-old son was at home, a faulty appliance in the kitchen led him to calling the fire brigade at 3 a.m. in the morning. Tim not only saved our kitchen, but he calmed the nerves of my son and he's also become a friend and obviously a guest on this podcast. You can subscribe to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, and while you're there, click on the bell to be alerted when new episodes are available. You can also subscribe on your favourite podcast app like iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify or Google Podcast. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Direct links to all social media can be found on the subscribe page of my website at www.amandaswellbeingpodcast.com. If you would like to contact me, you can send me a message via the contacts page on my website. Please feel free to suggest topics that you'd like to learn more about, and I'll do my best to deliver that to you. Finally, please take a minute to leave a rating on iTunes. It improves visibility and will inspire me to keep sourcing excellent guests for you. Thank you for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.